Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we have held a number of cybersecurity hearings this year, both in this committee and in the Small Business Committee, to examine the toll of cyber attacks on consumers and businesses. Many of the witnesses stated a clear, uniform set of rules was needed to address this problem. Can you elaborate on FSOC's proposal for a national plan to respond to cyber threats that you mentioned in your testimony?
Thank you, Congresswoman. This is a hugely important issue in every sector of our economy and our country because truly there are exposures to cyber risk everywhere. The financial sector, I think, has been a leader in taking it seriously, and the largest firms are putting enormous resources into trying to put systems in place that are effective. One of the things that we've done as a government that I think is very important is our National Institute of Standards, NIST, has put out best practices. We have encouraged the private sector to use best practices. I've certainly encouraged other financial regulators to have the same view. I think that we're at a kind of a moment where it's not just a question of what does a firm do itself, but you have to ask, what are the policies a firm has with regard to who it will do business with? A lot of the exposures come not directly at the firm, but when a third party connects to the firm. Right. So those firms not just have to worry about what are they doing, but do they have good standards as to who they will do business with? And our goal ought to be to bring all of those parties to the highest standard. I think it's premature to talk about having a single national standard that's mandatory. We've put it out as a voluntary standard. I think many are going and using that standard, and I think it's something we have to continue to look at.
And cost is an issue, especially for small businesses. And do you have any type of interagency working relationship on this matter, like SBA, Small Business Administration?
We do work across agencies in many areas. In particular, there are connections between, say, the utility sector and the financial sector, because if your power goes out, you're obviously going to face a risk. I'm not familiar with what the SBA's program on this is. In the financial area, one of the things that we've focused on is the need for smaller financial institutions to be able to work together or through organizations so that they can pursue best practices together, because the burden for any individual firm would be too high. That's one of the reasons it's so important to have legislation in this area to make the collaboration between firms easier and less risky for them. We've been very much supporting the enactment of cyber legislation, but even pending the enactment, we've put out executive orders to try and pave a way for firms to work together.
Thank you. As you mentioned, lending standards have decreased as financial institutions try to find profitability in the current low interest rate environment. While the loosening of credit markets since the recession is beneficial for small businesses, too much risk-taking could again lead to problems. If interest rates were to rise, what impact will this have on the markets overall and specifically on access to capital for small businesses?
Congresswoman, I think that there's at some point a trade-off between access to credit and risk-taking. We have raised concerns over the last couple of years that in some cases there may be an over-adjustment where you look at the FICO scores for home mortgages, the averages have gotten very high. There are a lot of not very risky potential borrowers who are having access to credit issues. Some of that requires a clarification of some of the policies put in place. It's why some of the agencies have been addressing the issue like put-back risk. Now, why am I answering a question about small business lending with housing issues? I think we all know for a lot of small businesses, the pathway to credit, in part, is through their personal home equity, their home mortgages. So the two are related. We've done a lot through our programs to reach out, both through the SBA and through programs we at Treasury run to make credit available to small businesses. We work with the community banks and local lenders to encourage that lending. I think it's an important question. I do think as we come out of through the financial crisis into a period of calmer macroeconomic circumstances, that's an important time for more lending activity to be appropriate. The question isn't do financial institutions have no risk? Do they take reasonable risks, and are they not overly leveraged?
Thank you.
Time.